Thank you for joining us today for our event, Don't Judge, Don't Just Manage Your Product, Lead It, where Def Method's very talented Senior Product Manager, Cladis, is joined by the very awesome Kaitlin Vignali, who is the Director of Product Management at Flatiron School. These wonderful ladies will be examining the difference between product management and product leadership. My name is Jen Imamura, and I'm the Director of Business Development here at Def Method. I'd like to take just a moment to tell you about our company as well as our co-host for the event today. Def Method is a New York City-based custom software consultancy, and we follow highly strategic, successful methodologies, including agile and test-driven development. Our dedicated team of software engineers, designers, and product managers deliver high-quality technical solutions through passion, extensive knowledge, and expertise that we've seen consistently drive successful results. Here at Def Method, we truly believe in the integrity of providing quality code and in continuous learning so that we are always the best for our clients. I welcome you to check us out at defmethod.com for more information about who we are and all of the services that we offer. In collaboration with Def Method, today's event is presented by ProductTank. ProductTank was founded in London back in 2010 and has a presence in over 185 cities worldwide. ProductTank is a meetup operating under the Mind the Product organization, bringing together the local product community in each of those cities. Whether you're a product manager, designer, developer, everyone that's a part of ProductTank is sharing their experiences across the board. The events through ProductTank are always free to attend and are organized by the volunteers from the local product community, and we thank ProductTank for being a part of today's event. Before we get started, I will just point out that there will be time at the end for audience Q&A. So throughout today's event, please feel free to send any questions, inquiries, comments in the chat box, and we will address those at the end of today's presentation. And there will be a few final announcements after that, but without further ado, I will pass it over to Katie and Kaitlin. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Cladis. I am a Senior Product Manager here at Def Method. And I'm here with my friend and colleague, former colleague at the Flatiron School, Kaitlin Vignali. Kaitlin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Kaitlin, Director of Product at Flatiron. I'm ready to get started.
Cool. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about how to apply important leadership principles to your product and your product organization. We've seen on our teams that when you lead your product, not just manage it, you can create better product outcomes, both for yourself and for your team and your product. This talk is a talk for product people of all levels and titles. You may be starting out on a product team, and you may want to uncover ways to lead your product with folks that might be more senior than you. Or maybe you're already managing a product team or already holding a senior leadership title, and you want to offer your team tools to help them lead their products more effectively. So no matter your title, if you're a product person, this talk is for you, and we are glad that you're here. So what is the difference between management and leadership more broadly, and why do we care? One way that I think about it is in the way that work gets done. So management might be defined as getting work done by telling others and instructing others in what to do. Leadership, by contrast, might be getting work done by guiding others in what to do. So the kind of subtext there is leading, is bringing people along rather than controlling them. So finding ways then to lead your product, or finding ways to bring people along in creating product outcomes rather than trying to control the outcomes, can ultimately help you and your team and your product all be more successful. So today we want to spend some time offering a few ways to do just that.
So we have a quote here that we think really encapsulates what we'll be talking about today, and I'm actually going to read it out loud because I think it's something we'll want to marinate on. So managers embrace process, seek stability and control, and instinctively try to resolve problems quickly, sometimes before they fully understand a problem's significance. Leaders, in contrast, tolerate chaos and lack of structure and are willing to delay closure in order to understand the issues more fully. In this way, business leaders have much more in common with artists, scientists, and other creative thinkers than they do with managers. So leadership means relinquishing control sometimes in favor of the unknown. And today we're going to talk about how to do that in a product context. I think an important note, though, before we get started is that you need to be able to do both of these things as a product manager, but it can be easy to fall into a predominantly management mindset when it comes to product. Management is a skill that PMs need to be fluent in, but it's also important to know when to pull the leadership lever. So we're going to talk about that more in depth.
Cool, I love that quote. So the first area we want to talk about where there may be opportunity to lead versus manage your product is in how you approach your user research. User research is a core pillar of any good product team's discovery process. But what you then do with that research is just as, and sometimes if not more, important than the research itself. So one way that I've socialized user research in the past is to report on it, report on what I've learned. So I include the transcripts and videos, the data, and I present a summary of all of the insights and themes that emerged. To me, this is managing your product. It's controlling what you want your reader, your stakeholders to take away from the research that you did. I've learned it can be much more effective instead to spend time collaborating with your team on the user research, bringing others along on the journey of understanding your users' needs. So in this way, you're kind of relinquishing some control over the outcome, right? But the result is that others on your team are more invested in your users' needs because they've reached their own conclusions from the data. And this, I think, is more leading your product. So what's a way that you can invite your team to participate in the journey to understand your users' needs in a more meaningful way? Well, one way that we like to do this is by building affinity maps with your team to turn that user research into real empathy for your users and to determine themes of focus. So quickly, in an affinity map exercise, when it comes to UX research, this might look like everyone writing down quotes from user interviews or insights, or even competitive analysis, and then collectively working together to group these insights by category. This is an affinity map for a product called Chefs on Demand, a mobile app that matches clients or users with chefs in their area to come to their home and cook a professional meal. And no, unfortunately, this is not a real product. But from writing down quotes from user interviews, we can start to group the quotes into themes. So you and your team together can start to collectively learn that users, for example, want a safe and special experience. You can use this as an opportunity to have a shared conversation about those themes that are emerging. So you could certainly do this independently and present the data to your team. You could say, hey guys, I've talked to all these users and they say that they want this app because they don't want to cook, but they want good food. You could do that, but instead leading an exercise like this, helping everybody come to the conclusion collectively can help your team be more invested in the outcome and have more empathy for your users. And again, this is what we think leading versus managing your product looks like. So another area where there may be an opportunity to lead versus manage your product is in how you handle feature requests. And these can be from stakeholders, from customers, anyone on your team or in your organization that makes feature requests. One approach is to fine-tune the solution for that feature request. So this might look like crafting user stories, building prototypes or wireframes, an important skill for a PM to have for sure. But another approach is to first spend more time in the problem space, defining the problem itself. This piece, this questioning piece, is leading your product versus managing it. So it means really questioning why the user has that request in the first place. What is really the problem statement behind that request? Maybe what assumptions need to be validated to prove that it's actually a real problem.
Yeah, so I think to talk a little bit more about this, I personally have found this to be one of the more challenging parts of leading the product. So sitting in the problem space and not rushing to solutions can be really challenging in a fast-paced product environment, but it's really up to the product leader to slow everyone down and create a culture of thoughtfulness rather than reactiveness when it comes to requests. So actually, you know, your stakeholder might come to you and say, hey, I have this idea and this is the problem and like, let's build this thing. It's so easy to get super excited about that and just go down that rabbit hole with them, but you might end up building a feature or a solution that doesn't address the root cause. So this is something that I actually look for in junior PMs that are transitioning to a more senior role. I think this is one of the flags that someone's becoming more senior in their product role is when they're able to push back on a stakeholder who's coming with a very specific need and find the root cause.
Awesome. Yeah. And you know, I'll pile on to that, that I think a lot of these things we're talking about like aren't easy to do by any means. And you know, that's why we're talking about them. And Kaitlin and I in particular, we're, you know, constantly working on all of these tips that we have for you today. We're all works in progress. But one way that I found to be effective in helping your team kind of sit, so to speak, in the problem space is something called a molecule map exercise. This forces a laundry list of features to instead become a group of molecule like you see here, with a feature or solution each linked to a specific problem, also linked to a specific persona or type of user. So again, going back to our Chefs on Demand product, our team has a ton of feature requests coming in, but as they come in, it's really unclear who they're for. Is this for the chef? Is this for the end client? Or what problem is it addressing? Is it actually a problem? So by going through this exercise, you can force that conversation and you can start to see if potentially there might be a different root problem that you need to address, or if there are alternative solutions that you want to explore. So if we go through this exercise for the feature of creating a chef profile, we've turned this into a molecule where the profile is addressing the problem of a client wanting to learn more about the chef before booking. Once we have our molecule, this opens up other solutions, right? We can start to brainstorm other things, like maybe it's reviews that we want to focus on. Maybe it's a link to the chef website. Maybe we want to validate our chefs through some sort of process so that people know that they're getting a certain caliber of chef when they book through our app. So there are, you know, different solutions that can emerge if you force this conversation and start to think more about the problem. We can also start to question some assumptions behind that problem or look more at the root problem. So maybe it's not that they want to learn more about the chef, but the problem is that clients don't feel comfortable with a stranger in their home. So what are ways that we can really optimize against that particular problem? The next area where we want to focus on in terms of leading your product versus managing it is in your roadmap. So specifically, are you spending more time on the left side of this slide or the right side? Are you spending more time driving execution for your roadmap or creating alignment and excitement around your roadmap? So a predominantly management mindset might look like what's on the left. So it's driving the execution of features and tasks and bug requests. A lot of focus is on the process and managing that process. But no matter how effectively you're managing that process and making actual progress on your roadmap, if you're not communicating how those user stories roll up to a greater mission, and if your developers don't know why they're working on what they're working on, then you're not leading your product. You're not bringing others along with a shared excitement of the outcomes and of your product. So leading your product looks like what's more on the right, and connecting those user stories to the larger product milestones and to the larger business goals or objectives. And it should be clear to everyone, again, not only what they're working on or how they're going to do it, but why they're actually working on it.
Totally. So it can be really easy to lose sight of that larger narrative and just fall back on project management. I think a tool that I use with my team is I talk about our goals as the forest, and then the specific initiatives are trees. And it's really important for a PM to make sure that both the product team members and stakeholders are aware of both the trees and the forest, and they can relate between the two. I think that when you end up doing that well, engineers and designers are able to actually create better products and bring better solutions to the table because they understand where you're going as a whole and not just maybe the specific Epic or Jira ticket that they're working on.
I love that. And one way you can make sure that you're communicating this effectively to your engineering team, your designers, and other stakeholders is to have different types of roadmap and adapting your roadmaps for your audience in order to continue to drive the execution today, but also paint a vision and build excitement for the future. My boss always says to treat your roadmap like a product you are designing, which inevitably requires some discovery on your part to explore your stakeholders' needs. So it's important for your roadmaps that you talk to your roadmap audience, know what they're looking to see from it. It might take a few different versions to get it right, just like a product, and that's okay. Ask for feedback and continue to improve. One idea to consider for a roadmap is using a now, next, and a later roadmap. This can be useful for your engineers and designers, and it clearly outlines the now. So what are you working on today? It outlines, and that work at the now level is, as you can see, more granular and specific because it's actually in flight. You have next, so stuff that's coming up soon. It's pretty well shaped, but needs a little bit more finessing in order to be worked on. And then we have the later stuff. And this is more about possibilities for the future than specific detailed features. So the goal here, and I have it color coded so that it's clear to see how these chunks of work, both in the now, next, and later buckets, roll up to larger business objectives of, for example, customer adoption or retention and user happiness. So no matter how the work ultimately gets done with the chef search or the contact chef, we know why we're working on it. We know that it is to build retention and user happiness.
Yeah, so I think, as Katie mentioned earlier, we're not experts in anything. And I think as we were putting this presentation together, this specifically really spoke to me. Earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, I wrote out a 30-page product requirements document for a rebuild of the system. And yeah, of course, after about a quarter, most of the things in that product requirements document were no longer relevant. So using a tool like this would have better led my engineering team and the product that we were building. And I wouldn't have wasted as much time being so specific about something that we weren't even going to touch until Q4. Obviously, as you go, you learn so much more. And that's when the best collaboration happens with our engineering teams, is when we sort of are specific up front and are a little bit more vague with clear goals for the future, so they can contribute to that creative process.
Awesome. And then for our executive team, we might have a roadmap that's more like this. As you can see, there's a progress bar that shows progress towards various milestones. We have some key capabilities of that milestone, the date that we're targeting, the user problem solved, and the business goal and expected impact. This is not to say that engineers and designers don't care about this information too. Of course they do. But for a high level document like a roadmap, Your executive team probably wants this to be more visible at first glance. These are likely the things that they're caring more about.
Yeah, and again, with my example I mentioned about my 30-page document, that's something I also gave to some folks more on the leadership side. And of course, no one really read it in depth, right? So we need to start thinking about how we can break up our roadmaps so that they speak to different audiences. And then on our next slide, we're going to go into a little bit more about how you need to communicate a little bit differently based on your audience.
Cool, thanks for teeing me up there. So the next area where there may be an opportunity to lead your product versus manage it is in your communication style. So as product managers, we often communicate very logically. We write out detailed user flows. We capture every logical path and every possible use case. We think through a user's action and what the associated consequences might be. But leading your product means communicating effectively with all stakeholders. So a product leader also needs to sell ideas to others like clients or a marketing team or your CEO. And lengthy user flow diagrams aren't always going to help you do this. But tapping into emotional responses can sometimes help you be more convincing in bringing a broader audience along with you in your product vision.
So how you communicate will always depend on the person and their communication skills, and also their role and seniority. Learning to speak the language of your audience is a key skill to develop in order to lead your product successfully. And this is another skill that I look for as more junior PMs are developing into senior PM roles.
And our tip here is to sometimes trade in your polished presentations in favor of whiteboarding when trying to convince stakeholders of an idea. So what do I mean by that? So back to our Chefs on Demand product, we could present this diagram of how the user logs into the app, all of the paths around resetting a password or creating an account, how a user searches for a chef, what happens when a chef isn't available, what happens when they select a chef and contact him or her. Great information, certainly important to do. But when convincing others of your idea, something like whiteboarding, picking up a marker, going to a whiteboard and drawing out your idea, really telling a story can sometimes be more convincing and keep your team focused on the big picture. And I recognize that we are living in the world that we're living in today. And I think a lot of us long for the time we could go up to a whiteboard and draw out our ideas. But in the meantime, we found that tools like Miro and Whimsical have been really effective in helping us to tell our stories and whiteboard in a remote environment. So I would encourage everyone to check out tools like that. So what we could do, contrast that diagram with something more like this, where we have, first the user logs in, maybe coming from a point of frustration because the user's in-laws are coming over for dinner and she needs a plan for dinner. This may or may not happen to me. Then she sees how she can search for chefs. So she's feeling a little better. This is pretty cool. And then she sees the results of her search and is now getting more excited about the chefs coming, or the chefs available in her area, I should say. And then finally, she is ultimately relieved that she can find someone to come to her home and cook for her and her in-laws when they come over. So this can all be done really simply at a high level on a whiteboard or a tool of your choice. The point is you're keeping it high level with the right amount of detail so that your stakeholders don't get lost or distracted by design elements or details. You really want them focused on the journey and the emotion and the problems that you're solving.
Yeah, this reminds me of in the Shape Up methodology, fat marker sketches. You can't get too detailed when you're using a fat marker. So having that as a tool actually creates a physical boundary that prevents you from being too detailed. So it's definitely something that I'm trying out right now in my work.
Cool. So the final area that we want to touch on where there's an opportunity to lead your product versus manage it is in your style of prioritization. So a good product person always has a framework in place to prioritize features. But what separates managing your product from leading your product is how you approach that, somewhat position of power when it comes to feature requests and prioritization. So when those requests come in, or when you're having those conversations with stakeholders, do you tell them that's low priority, or sorry, that's not on the roadmap? Or do you bring them along in your prioritization decisions and really talk about trade-offs, even when it means a request won't actually end up on the roadmap? And this is, oftentimes more time-consuming, right? You're not solving the problem quickly. You're sitting with that chaos a little bit, but can be useful for continuing to have engaged stakeholders that will continue to give you feedback and be excited about the product.
Yep, so this goes back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier. And I think your role as a leader is to help draw the line between the feature request and team goals, company goals, and any data points about users impacted. So this is relating the trees to the forest. A manager is just telling people why the request can't fit in. And as Katie was saying, like, that's the quick, easy solution. The harder thing is to get your team and your stakeholders on board with what the goals are and how your work is laddering up to those.
Yeah, for sure. And this is not easy, to be transparent about your prioritization framework. But again, like, we believe it is worth the time and can help you show your empathy for your stakeholders, and also just drive better product outcomes. So in this diagram, we can take an internal stakeholder just through high level our prioritization framework. You can social this with your stakeholders, your company, so everybody knows kind of how decisions are made. The first thing is, does it align with any strategic intents within the organization? Does it solve a real and important problem for users? Is the problem experienced by a significant number of users? And are you confident in your assessment? And obviously, this is not an exact science, but what you can do is just walk your stakeholders through that process, and then also show them the larger roadmap. So is this opportunity likely to be more impactful than other opportunities? And help them understand the trade-offs that might have to be made if their request was ultimately pursued in favor of these other items. It's not a perfect science, and as a product leader, you're not going to make everybody happy all the time, for sure, but is a good way to engage others in your process, and not always be saying no. So maybe you'll get asked out to lunch once we return back to normal.
Yeah, so I think that something that might shake out in this process is friction around goal setting, like higher level goal setting. Sometimes goal setting happens, as much as we might try to be like very specific when we're doing goal setting, it might happen in a vacuum and everyone's just agreeing to whatever they're seeing in front of them because it all sounds really good. But then when you get down to brass tacks, they might realize that they've missed some things that are important to them. And so making sure that you're realigning people as you're going through this process is really important, but then taking the learnings from that and applying it to goal setting in the future is really important to avoid this in the next go round.
Love that. Great. Well, we have made it to the end. A quick summary of ways that you can start to lead your product, not just manage it. The first is make sure you're helping others understand your user needs, not just reporting on them. You're spending time defining the problem, not just jumping to the solution. You are aligning your team and building excitement around your roadmap rather than just executing on it. You're communicating with emotion and reaching different types of stakeholders in the right way. And you are bringing others along in your prioritization process and not making those decisions in a silo. Thanks, everyone. I hope that was an informative and useful conversation for you. We do have time for questions. We'd be happy to take those now.
All right, so we got a couple questions, which is awesome. Do you use any specific software tools for product management?
Do you want to take this one first?
So yeah, I use a couple of different things. I mean, for the management side of things, I'm using Jira, and then for the planning and doing more of the discovery type work, that's where I'm really in Whimsical. Whimsical has become my replacement for whiteboarding and getting people in a room and things like that. But I think those are my main two tools that I'm using. And then there's more, sometimes for project management type work that's not so specific to engineering. Initially, we're using Monday for a lot of that. What about you, Katie?
Yeah. So Jira, definitely once I am in, execution mode. I do like Whimsical, but I've been really into Miro lately in this virtual world for things like product discovery and doing a lot of collaboration. And then for estimating and building out like very simple roadmaps, like I like Google Sheets. It's easy, it gets the job done, got the formulas in there, does the job.
Yes, really any Google Suite product.
Sure.
Okay, another question is, people talk about a PM's job as saying no. Are we saying that that's not really the case with product leadership?
It's a great question.
Do you want to take this one? You want me to?
Sure. I mean, I can.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll add
it. Is product management saying no? No, I don't think it's saying no. I think, as we've talked about today, your job is to help others see, in the same way where we are always trying to empathize with our end users and be in their shoes so that we can build a better experience for them. I think we need to do the same thing with our stakeholders. So the outcome to, let's say, a feature request might be the same if you say, no, that's not a priority, that's not on the roadmap. That might be the same as if you say, like, let's go out to lunch and like, let's talk about it. But it's in the way that you're approaching that relationship and the way that you're bringing them along in kind of your decision-making process that I believe is the difference between leading and managing.
Yeah, and I think you might find yourself in situations where, in the moment you just have to say, hey, no, we can't work on this thing right now. But to lead that stakeholder and to lead the product, you also then have to do the work of making sure they understand the why behind that. So you're always going to have cases, I think, where you end up having to say no. But like Katie said, it's how you're saying no that's really important. And that's going to sort of separate the managers from the leaders in that use case. Okay, another question. Should junior product managers or mid-level ones also be acting in a lead versus manage way? How do we hire for that? So I can answer to this one. I think you have to be able to do both. You shouldn't be over-indexing in one section of our presentation versus the other. Like you're going to want to be doing both. And the key to progressing through your product career, I think, is finding when you're managing versus when you're leading. And I actually think that this can be organization specific. Like you might be in an organization where eng managers are doing a lot of the delivery focused management and product managers are more focused on discovery and user research. But you might be in an organization where you have to be able to do both. And like I've definitely at times managed more than I've led. And the result of that is, hey, we delivered on time. We built a really great feature that works really well, but it doesn't actually do the thing that we need it to do. Because I didn't spend enough time leading and doing that discovery work and bringing our stakeholders and our engineers along for that ride. I was so focused on like making sure that our Jira tickets were perfect and that we were meeting, our velocity and things like that. And in terms of hiring, I would say like indexing for situational questions where that person's able to speak 2 times that they did both of those things. So set up your product management interviews so that you have those questions teed up, and they should be able to demonstrate in the interview times that they've managed successfully through something and times that they've led the product. Do you want to add anything, Katie?
I think that's spot on.
Okay.
It's an annoying answer, right? Because it's like,
yeah,
both. But it's, what we've seen is that product managers are very busy, and it's easy to fall into that predominantly management mindset because for some of us it is easier. So this the purpose of having this conversation is to find ways when you're in those moments to take a step back and see where you can flex those leadership skills because they are so important.
Okay, so another question, which I think nicely rolls into what we were just talking about. Do these tactics to lead versus manage apply to different product roles like product owners and product strategists? And I think the answer to that is yes. And that's where I'm saying it's organization. It really depends on your organization. So you might be somewhere where there is a different role where they're doing more of that product leadership, and the product management role is more focused on the specific execution and delivery of features. So again, I think this one's a tough one to answer just because every org sort of treats this a little bit differently. What about you, Katie?
Yeah, and I think, Kaitlin, you and I have had this conversation before. It's also about, seeing where there are gaps in your organization. Where might there be an opportunity to try out one of these more like leadership oriented activities with your team. If somebody's not doing it at your organization now, experimenting and seeing kind of where you can find ways to incorporate it.
All right, I really love this question. How do you get people excited about your roadmap when you're building something that is objectively a bit boring? This is for the engineering and designers on the team that's building the thing. I think that's where it really comes down to you yourself being excited about it. I've spent the last year building business systems, like very boring record keeping systems, but they're so impactful for the company. And if I'm excited about it, my team is excited about it. I could talk about it all day actually, because it has actually made me very excited about this work. And I think finding specifically for engineers, the little points in time where they can maybe do something creative with their engineering skills that they're excited about. And it's maybe not like, ooh, this is a sexy product that everyone's going to go and use and see, but they're able to use a skill set that they find really interesting or learn something new. Anything you want to add there, Katie?
Yeah. So I don't know the specific product that you're referring to, but I have worked on products before that, maybe were objectively boring, but somebody's excited about it. There is a user, there's a persona out there that will get a lot of excitement from what you're building. And what I try to do is channel that as much as I can. And then as Kaitlin mentioned, then if you're motivated, if you're excited about it, that energy can really, permeate to the rest of your team.
All right. How are we doing on time? I think we can keep going, right? Yes. Okay, so for the roadmap and goal setting side of this conversation, curious if the panelists have experience or tips for negotiating with executives of B2B teams who have a culture around sales-driven roadmaps, pre-sold features, hard deadlines over quality of product, etc. I think this is more prevalent in B2B. How can we help nudge them more towards this framework?
It's a really good question. So I used to hold meetings with all of my sales leads. So the situation I'll describe was a situation where we had a very small team, so very under-resourced. Surprise, I'm sure a lot of people deal with that challenge. And we had a ton of specific client requests coming in. What I did is I met with my sales leads weekly to review our larger business objectives. So what were the 3 things as a business that we were trying to achieve in the next 6 months? And then we took the approach of walking through each of the requests and seeing how they laddered up to that larger objective. And it was really good, instead of having like one-on-one conversations, we all kind of sat in a room and did it together, so that they could have those conversations directly and like fight it out, so to speak, in terms of what was going to be more effective in reaching that objective. So I found that to be helpful. Caitlin, do you have anything to add on to that?
No, I think that's great. We have so many questions, so I'm going to keep going. Someone asked a very tactical question. Will the deck be shared also? And I think the answer to that is yes.
I believe yes. I believe we'll send out a recording.
Okay, great. Let's see. Can you tell a story to illustrate how you successfully guided execs to come around to your plan? Yeah, so I think that my tip for this is relationship building, spending time with your leadership, if you have access to them, is really important, and sort of developing a relationship with them outside of the product work that you're doing to get them to agree to something, I think is super important. And spending time talking more about your vision and where you're going, as opposed to like, hey, I need you to approve this specific initiative. And I think that that's where I've been most successful, is when I've spent the time outside of something specific, developing a relationship.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think something that I found to be helpful too is almost have like pre-meetings with your the people that will be in that kind of big executive meeting, to kind of really get at where they're coming from. Again, it's like kind of treating your meeting like a product, like who's going to be in the room, where are they coming from, what are they going to want to be most concerned about, and framing the conversation around that way to get buy-in. And I think it's also, I've made this mistake several times, hopefully I'll learn. It's also important to give your team options. I don't think it is as effective to come in and say like, this is what you got to do. It kind of goes back to that user research report, right? Of like, look at all these things that I learned and this is what we have to do. It's more of like, hey, like these are some options. Let's talk about pros and cons, because a lot of people want to feel like they are, having a say in the ultimate decision.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore the pre-meeting. Such a valuable tool. You should never be going cold into an executive meeting to get something approved or aligned on. You should have already met with each of those individuals to get them aligned. And I know that's really hard because sometimes you can't really get on the calendar of someone that's super busy, but as much as you can plan ahead and do that work, you should be able to go into a meeting knowing everyone's reaction and opinion before that meeting starts. Super valuable tip that I've learned from Katie and others at Flatiron. Okay, so can you talk a bit about metrics / KPIs? What are the right metrics to prioritize? I'm gonna kick this one over to you, because I know you're good at this.
Annoying. It depends. It depends answer. So with KPIs, I think one thing to be mindful of is, one exercise you can do to kind of get at the right KPIs is to ask why. Maybe the like 3 or 5 whys exercise is helpful. If you're tracking a specific metric or KPI, ask yourself like, why are you actually tracking that? There could be a deeper KPI behind that that's actually more valuable to track. So, for example, if you're measuring conversions on a web page, that's fine. It may be an important measure to track, but are there certain types of conversions that you are seeing that are more valuable in the future? Is there kind of a deeper level that's rolling up to a larger business objective that you want to be looking at? So always, if you're tracking something, always have a good answer for like why you're doing that, when what actually is being done with it. It should be there to inform, help you make insightful decisions, not just be a number to track. It's a good question.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Okay, how do you do affinity mapping with distributed/remote work environments? I think that a tool that I've used, and I don't know, Kate, if we actually use this together, was stickies.io. I think that's what it's called. It's literally like Post-its that are on a board that everyone can move around and add to and things like that. I think my one tip for that is provide some structure and instruction ahead of time, and make sure that people are really clear how you're going to be doing that. Because, as soon as people see the stickies, they get really excited and then they're just in there moving everything around. So if you want something specific to happen, make sure you sort of communicate that ahead of time, would be my tip.
Yeah.
Other tools that you're using, Katie, or is it mostly something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I use, that's a great one. Miro is great. You can also use Google Docs. I mean, it's not, you don't have the fun stickies, but you can get at a similar outcome.
True. Okay. How granular should you get when prioritizing collaboratively, epics versus features versus smaller stories? Got it. I think with stakeholders, I like to focus on the problem that we're trying to solve for or the piece of value that we're trying to add. If this question is about when I'm collaborating with stakeholders on what we're going to be prioritizing, it's more about the higher level versus something as granular as a Jira ticket. Like, they don't probably want to be in the weeds of like, here's all the back end things we have to do and the front end things that we need to accomplish this. So I tend to keep it pretty high level, and then there's sort of like the behind the scenes management work that happens that's more specific to the epics and the stories and things like that. Anything additional you want to add?
Yeah,
Kate?
I like that. I usually use like larger product like milestones as the epic, and then the user stories as smaller pieces to achieve that. And something that I think is hard to do but worth doing as you're designing these the chunks of work that will roll up to larger milestones is that you are within each release, whether it's 2 or 3 week sprint cycle, making sure that you are shipping something of value within that time. Going back to bringing others along and keeping others excited about your roadmap, that can be one way that the execution can actually do that. You just have to be really thoughtful about how you're designing your sprints.
Okay, couldn't find my unmute button there for a second. Okay, how do you choose when to spend more time creating different backlogs or communicating more emotionally in a fast-paced environment? More time on this means less time on other tasks. Yeah, I think that this is something that actually, again, I would address at sort of your team level, going to your manager and talking through, okay, in order for me to be the most effective in leading this product, here's what I need a little bit more time to do. I think that trying to do everything perfectly all the time is just going to be a trap, and you're actually going to be very exhausted at the end of every single day, or you're just going to be working crazy hours. So I think that when you're seeing the beginning of a project or a feature set that you're going to be working on, that's the time to invest, maybe spending a little bit more, making sure everyone's aligned, they understand the goals, and that sort of thing. And then it's not a set it and forget it for the rest of the work. You're still going to be involved in that. But I think it's really at the beginning of an initiative and toward the end of it as it's wrapping up and you're coming back to stakeholders and you're trying to roll it out and get some testing in place and things like that. Katie, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think you have to accept that you're not going to do everything well or perfectly all the time. But as Kaitlin likes to say, it's pulling the lever at the right time that you need to pull to get to whatever that next step is. But I think just acceptance of not being able to do everything all the time is really important.
Yeah, and I think like we always do retros at our company at the end of a project or at the end of a sprint actually, but that's something that you should be doing with yourself and saying like, oh, you know what, that was a moment when I was managing and I actually would have been more successful if I was leading. Because it's really hard when you're starting to think like this to say like, okay, what's the point in time that I should start doing this other thing when I've traditionally been managing? It's going to be a lot easier for you to start integrating this into your workflows if you're looking back at how you've operated and pinpointing those moments where there was a struggle or something didn't go the way you were planning, and then trying to apply this framework on top of it so that the next go round, you know when to pull that lever, as I like to say.
Love that.
Cool. Let me see here. How do you deal personally?
Sorry to interrupt. Maybe one more question so we can have a couple minutes at the end.
Got it. Okay. So here's a good one. How do you deal personally with fielding feature requests from key stakeholders or other members of the team, people who feel a need to be heard, and quote, hear them out rather than tell them it's not a priority when you yourself are very pressed for time? Yeah, this is a tough one. I think that one of the themes I'm hearing in these questions is like, no one has time for anything. Yeah, so I would actually start to evaluate, because really like having a good relationship with your stakeholder is super important, and spending some time with them to get them thinking in a product-oriented way is really important because it's going to actually free up more of your time and ensure that you're making better products like down the road. So I would do something that I do every once in a while, which is just completely reevaluate my calendar. Where am I spending my time? Do I really need to be going to X meeting every single day or every other day? And then finding that pocket of time so that you can dedicate to leading the product is really important, which I know is like it's an annoying answer again, because I'm saying you have to find the time to do that. And so if you're super pressed for time, the most important thing is like making sure that you're managing and leading the product well. And so you need to find those things in your calendar that are actually a much lower priority because it's not laddering up to that end goal for you. Any other tips, Katie?
Yeah, I think that's really good. One thing that I've done in terms of managing my calendar is started to ask people for agendas in their invites, because naturally I think in organizations a product person is invited to a lot of meetings that might not be 100% necessary. So by asking for an agenda ahead of time and like what is it that you need from me in this meeting, might help you find opportunities to get some of that time back in your day. But yeah, I mean, if it was easy, then everybody would do it. So this is why I think all of us are ongoing working on all of these things so that we can become great product leaders in our organizations.
All right. I think we're going to hand it back over to Jen.
Yeah.
Jen? Okay.
Yes, thanks, guys. Let's go to the next slide. So if anyone attending would like to reach out to either Katie or Kaitlin, you may do so directly. And thank you everyone for joining. We appreciate you hanging out with us for today's event. As mentioned in the beginning, we have a few announcements. We have what are called product consult signups, as well as engineering office hours. Essentially, we have conversations with people like you who have questions like those that came up today, and we share our expertise with you. So if you have a challenge, if we weren't able to address one of your questions, please sign up for our office hours and our sign up. We would love to help you out and get to know you. One of the other things that we would invite you to is our social media. If you're on any social media platforms, please join us. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter, Facebook, and we also have a blog on Medium. And last but not least, we also have a newsletter that comes out monthly. So if you haven't signed up for that already, please do so. We look forward to seeing you again soon. We appreciate your time. We look forward to our next event, which will be happening after the new year. So stay tuned. If you haven't, like I said, signed up for a newsletter, you'll know more about our next event there. And that concludes our event for today. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.